Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another stream. It's me. I'm Mike. I'm the only person that streams here. I run the channel. I keep introducing myself because it's custom. Hey, how's it going? Thank you for being here. Today we are going to talk about prep for Daggerheart, in that I'm going to do my prep for Daggerheart for one of my weekly games. I had been asked a couple different times for examples of specific prep rather than talking about game prep in generalities or talking theory in terms of my perspective on things. And I have a big list of topics for streaming about, and the prep one was on that list, and I thought that this would be a useful time to do that. So here we are. I hope that this will be illustrative, informative, entertaining, all of those things that you want a stream to be. Some quick shout outs from the last week or so. So thank you to Junk Rabbit for the follow, as well as Chris Howard Writer, Bionic Panda Zero, and Dead Hand Illustration, who is in the chat. Hello, Dead Hand Illustration. Dead Hand was streaming earlier today doing some illustration for a piece of art to go with an adversary that's being designed for use with the Daggerheart rules. So a fellow community creator here. You're very welcome, and hello to everybody who is watching and lurking, and folks who are watching on the VOD. So the way that I want to do this is I'm just going to jump in to my Google Doc where I do my prep, and I am just going to try to do what I would normally do while talking through that process. As usual, we are going to probably use some stuff from the Darrington Press Daggerheart SRD, and so we're using the community gaming license, and that text is here. So now I'm going to jump over, and we don't need that text because I have done the thing, and here we are. So some stuff to know about this game. One, I am running the game in the Witherwild campaign frame, and the Witherwild is a setting where nighttime lasts a week and then daytime lasts a week. And so I settled on the term cycle to replace day for a 24-hour cycle within the week of day or week of night, just to not have to use day within the week of night as a phrase like all the time. And so I'm keeping track of this so that we're moving back and forth between the week of day and the week of night more consistently. We have a character who has the halfling feature where you give everybody in your group a hope at the start of the session. So I have a note of keeping track of that to remind my player to do that. And I'm adopting a technique or kind of a move from a friend of mine who runs Daggerheart that I get to play in, where he will ask the player of the halfling, so what is it you do to bring hope to the group for this session? And it's just a nice way to open the game with a little bit of RP and kind of shared narrative agency. I like it. I have been using it. I think it's going well. This is an interesting session for me to do this prep stream on because it's pretty open-ended. I ran my Voice of the Swarm adventure that I have shown off a little bit of last week for this group, and it was the second time that I'd run this adventure. I ran it for one of my SPG groups, and then for the other one. They approached things very differently, but the group, this formerly Monday group, now playing on Fridays, finished the adventure, or finished the written material of the adventure last week, and so now they have some they have some flexibility or leisure in terms of what they want to do, right? Where are they going to go? What are they going to do next? But over the course of the adventure, they did a lot of things that would have knock-on effects and probably do some destabilization to Greymire, the town where most of this adventure, Voice of the Swarm, is set. So I think there's a pretty good chance that the player characters will go back to Greymire in this coming session, and there is some chance that either having done that they will move on, or if they decide not to go back to Greymire, or to try to go back to Greymire for the least amount possible, they will have the chance to go other places. And what that means is that I am going to try and do some prep that is pretty versatile, where I can take it and move it in a bunch of different directions so that I have some material to use almost no matter what the group decides to do. That is a little tricky, but I think I will be able to make it work because I did some of that same type of prep yesterday for my Tuesday game. And so I can steal some work from myself, which has been one of the upsides of running 2 games in the Witherwild campaign frame, where if I prepare stuff that is for the Witherwild setting in general, then I can use it in one game that I prepped for and then potentially draw on it to use in the other game. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my close-up real quick, and I'm going to open my other prep document. We don't need this the whole time for that because I've shown it. These 2 different Witherwild games have, it's all different players. There's no overlap in players, only me as the GM. But there's also some difference in how they approach role-playing. There's some difference in that the Friday group, formerly Monday, are all folks that I have played RPGs with before, because this is the kind of a reunited group who all played in a Blades in the Dark game that I ran. And we're doing this. I'm going to delete some stuff. So what I often do when I'm in my prep, and we're going to go back to here, is I grab the adversary stat blocks of adversaries I think are either likely to show up or would be useful for me to have already on deck in case the situations dictate that, oh, actually, I want to have this adversary on hand. Demiplane, which is, right, Demiplane and Roll20 are connected. Demiplane and therefore Roll20 has tools for kind of pulling up adversary stat blocks and then running them out of the VTT, which is great. The thing is, I do a lot of custom design because really the reason is because I was one of the designers of the game, and so I like using the tools of the game in terms of creating bespoke material. I think it's also part of what I offer as a GM of Daggerheart, right, is that really high level of expertise with the mechanical systems of the game, right? The idea that when I present an adversary, I have adjusted or customized them not just to this campaign frame, but to this particular group of player characters, this particular story, right? I'll make an adjustment between using it in one of my weekly games and using it in another. I took a set of adversaries that I used in this game to use in the other game. I didn't end up using them this week, but in porting them over, I had to take a character in that adversary group who had been specifically made as, like, in response to and with a relationship to one of the characters in this group. That character doesn't exist in the other group, so I had to make some adjustments. One of the key things that I'm going to try to do every session with my prep is create prompts or hooks that are specific to the PCs, right? And so that can look like NPC allies rivals. It can look like targeted prompts based on background, etc. It can look like paint the scene prompts that are more general but help me establish and fill out a scene that is then trying to accomplish one of the things that I want from a story arc in terms of engaging a particular player character or spotlighting some element of their background or motivation or their personal agenda in the storyline at hand. Just going to mute my mic when I drink here for sensory protection. So one of the things that I did for the session yesterday was I grabbed these adversaries that I had built starting in a stream where I have an Umbral Huntmaster and then several different types of Umbral Hounds, which are these, what if a skeleton was drenched in shadow, like shadow was a solid or like a liquid ichorous substance? And they went over beautifully with my group yesterday. So one of the things that I can do for this session is to just take the material that I already had and bring it over. These will need to be updated to tier 2, but I need to update them to tier 2 for the other group as well. And so spending the time to tier these up from tier 1 to tier 2 is actually a really efficient use of time for me. And so let's go ahead and do it here, at least for a couple of these adversaries, right? I made these adversaries, but you can use this same tier up, tier down process that I'm going to be walking through for taking tier 1 adversaries from the core book or from other supplements and bringing them up to tier 2 so that you can use them once your group is, at level 2 and then whenever they're levels 2 through 4. So first I update the tier. I go and look at the difficulty. A difficulty of 13 here is a bit above average for tier 1. If I were doing just a really simple straight adjustment, I would bump it up to difficulty 16, which is then 2 higher than the kind of average difficulty that's referenced in the SRD on page 72 of that SRD, where average for tier 2 is difficulty 14. I don't feel too bad about 16 here. I think that's fine. This is a leader adversary. I'm going to adjust their damage thresholds. 714 for tier 1 is just a tiny bit high for that tier. So I'm going to say that they are going to be 1122 for tier 2. Noting here that I have a brawler in this campaign that I'm prepping for right now. Brawlers do really high damage. They're still in beta, so the final version of this class might be different. But right now, a tier 2 brawler is doing 2d8 plus 2d6 damage, or 2d10 plus 2d6 damage if they are the Juggernaut subclass, which my brawler is. That means that on a 2d10 plus 2d6, their average damage is 18 physical plus whatever damage bonus they have, right? So average of 2d10 is a 5 and a 6, which is 11. Average of 2d6 is 7, which is a 3 and a 4, so 18 damage. And that's their average damage. This means that a brawler character, my brawler, is often able to do severe damage on basically any adversary I throw at them. The other player characters can put out some good damage. We have a Seraph who does some pretty good damage. But the top end of the damage curve that my group can output is pretty high. And that means I'm going to be mentally keeping track of where these, especially the severe damage thresholds are, in case I need to boost them up a little bit more so that the brawler character has targets that are a little bit higher to shoot for, right? They're more likely to need sometimes to spend resources to add extra damage, whether that is through their combo strikes feature or other things. If the brawler is basically always rolling severe damage no matter what, there isn't necessarily anything for them to strive for in terms of their damage output. It also means that they melt adversaries really quickly. So 22 is higher than 18 if every die that they roll goes up by 1. You go from 18 to 22. So I might do 11, 23 under the idea that I want to be just over 1 standard deviation of damage threshold higher than the average that this player character is going to roll. Now, the other thing for me to do is to double check their character sheet and make sure that I'm not misremembering how they do damage. Like, do they have other things that give them just a flat bonus to the damage? And do I need to keep that in mind when I'm doing my calculations? I don't often get this granular when I am doing my adversary prep, but I have noticed in the last couple of sessions that the brawler is really just burning through my adversaries. And one of the things that I want to try and do is find places to make some tweaks. So my brawler does that 2d10 plus 2d6 plus 2 damage. That means that their average is 20. And if I go to 23, that is just under 1 standard deviation. And by what I mean by standard deviation on damage here is that I take the average numbers on those dice results and I increase each of them by 1. So it's 6, 7, 4, 5 as the damage, right? Which is a net plus 4 because there's 4 dice. I'm going to try 1123 here and see what that looks like. If I don't use these adversaries here, I'm still fairly well within the broad spread of what damage thresholds for tier 2 can look like. And I tend to go through these adjustments and then review things in relationship to each other. So we've got 7 HP here, which is not especially high for a leader adversary, but I think I'm going to leave it. Attack of plus 3, damage needs to go up to 2 dice, right? Because in general, an adversary deals a number of damage dice equal to their tier, and these would be tier 2 enemies. I'm going to say that this damage output should also probably go up a little bit, just with a flat bonus. They have a plus 2 experience and a plus 3 experience. I think I'm okay with that. Also notable, the Umbral Huntmaster has plus 2 difficulty if completely covered in shadow, but they are vulnerable when exposed to a source of extremely bright light. So that's daylight or a big magical light. So I have a Seraph character. If that Seraph were to use Bolt Beacon on the Huntmaster or on something near the Huntmaster, I think that Huntmaster would then become vulnerable because of how Bolt Beacon is described. So I have an adversary that, especially in shadow, is really tough. But if you think through the magic logic of shadow creature probably doesn't like light, you can have that swing that goes the other way. It's not that I want these adversaries to be impossible to beat. I want it to be a fun challenge, and I want to create situations where my players are going to try to think outside the box and think through the logic of the scene in order to gain situational advantages. Right, this is a fear ability. This is a bigger fear feature. None of these do damage, so I'm pretty much going to leave them as is at tier 2. The way this adversary group is meant to work is that the Huntmaster directs the Umbral Hounds, and the Hounds keep the players occupied, and then the Skulk type Umbral Dog steals people's shadows with the Capture Shadow action. I used this last night and I realize that it is underpowered because I did not have it dealing normal damage. now, Capture Shadow is basically the standard attack with an optional kicker. I could turn Capture Shadow into a reaction that says, when you make a successful attack against a target within melee, spend a fear to force the target to make a presence reaction roll, yada, yada, yada. It's a little bit 6 of one, half dozen of the other. For now, I think I'm going to leave it this way because what that means is that I'm making a deliberate choice to have one of these hounds make an attack where the thing I'm trying to do is also take their shadow. And I operated under that paradigm in my game yesterday, and I think that was useful because it let me create variation. It's not just that these adversaries are always only trying to take your shadow. This way, I can have them attack and then take a shadow, and if I get maybe a second shadow out of 4 PCs, I can back off because these adversaries get more powerful the more shadows they can take and then feed to the Hunt Master. But that lever of more pressure, less pressure is there for me to use as I want to. I'm not boxing myself in to having to go any particular way because it's not a passive. Whenever this adversary succeeds on an attack, spend a fear to do this because I might not have fear, and so I can't write it that way. I'm writing it this way so that I have a feature that is clear and usable, but still leaves me with some flexibility. I'm just reformatting these a little bit. I have a particular type of formatting that I use for adversaries in like a Google Doc style that is just more legible to me. This is not like official formatting approach. It's just my internal house style that is for me to use in games. Right? So we've got the Umbral Hound. Let's tier this one up and then move on from this part because I think it's just one of a number of things that I might want to do for my prep. So this skulk is 918. This is already basically tier 2 damage thresholds because I want these skulks to be weaker. I think, going to bring their HP down to 3 so that if you deal severe damage to them, they are just done. I'm going to mute again here, almost forgot. What I've found in running games of Daggerheart is that for my preference, I would rather have shorter fight scenes with more ups and downs than longer fight scenes that are meant to be more grueling. A longer fight scene is more likely to deplete some of the character resources in terms of armor slots and stress and HP and things like that. But I don't necessarily want every fight scene to push the player characters to their limits. The way that I would probably use these Umbral Hounds in the hunt pack is as a not quite random encounter, but a challenge encountered during a journey. And so I don't need to tune them up to be a deadly encounter, right? There aren't specific breakdowns in Daggerheart of this is a minor encounter or a major encounter or a deadly encounter. We have the battle point system, and I use it sort of as a benchmark, but there's a little bit in this where I play it by ear based on how a fight is going. I may make tweaks as I go, whether that is tweaks in how I choose my moves or tweaks in adjustments to the mechanics. My goal in this is always, what do I think is going to create the most interesting, most memorable story for everybody at the table? And part of that is what's interesting to me, but it's certainly not all of it, and it's not even most of it. These 2 games that I'm running are on Start Playing, which is a paid service. So I am doing my very best to bring my A game every time, and I am cognizant of the fact that I am delivering an experience for the players, and I want to emphasize them getting to have a fun time. That means they usually are going to win fights, but I want it to be difficult enough to be exciting, right? And so these are some of the things that I am balancing. Stress 3 I think is still fine. Damage of 2d6 plus 2 I think is actually low. I'm going to go ahead and bump that up to 2d8. I'm going to double check against some skulk type adversaries. Yeah, the direwolf was 1d6 plus 2, but then they have the pack tactics, and they have the hobbling strike, which deals a lot of damage. So I'm going to look at some of these other skulks. I'm just skimming through the SRD, as I often do. The jagged knife shadow is 1d4, but plus 4 physical damage at tier 1. And now looking at tier 2, assassin poisoner is 2d8 plus 1 damage. And then they have the Grindletooth poison that makes targets vulnerable. Let's look for one other skulk. The Cult Fang is 2d8 plus 4. That's probably about what I want for these hounds. So I'm tweaking my damage, and I'm going to leave that there. So how would I use this group of adversaries in the scene, right? So they're returning to Greymire, probably. And or travel, right? Because this is the Witherwild, just traveling through the countryside is meant to be pretty consistently dangerous, even for player characters. Not lethal for player characters, but if there are random encounters between settlements, they can be a major challenge. Having a group of adversaries is great because I have an encounter basically already packaged. A thing that I use, and I'm trying to use as much as I can, is to bring in environments, especially for travel and exploration. So I'm going to jump back over here because this Google Doc is 44 pages long, and I have a lot of stuff already here, which means I am going to grab myself one of my other environments that is already in here. Part of why I do the homebrewing slash community creation that I do is that I want to give myself resources. So I'm pulling up my homebrew environment document, and I'm going to grab my Perilous Journey environment that I created. And we're going back to here. So, no. I'm going to paste it without formatting because otherwise it becomes a mess. So here we are. We're back. This is, I've written it as a tier 1 traversal, so we're going to upgrade it to tier 2. Changing the tier or tier scaling for environments, for me, the way I do it is pretty straightforward. I'm going to up the difficulty, usually by 3, because that's the kind of benchmarking system that is laid out in the SRD. And then I'm going to look for places where I've either listed damage, right? So there's a feature that does damage down here in dangerous feature. This is going to turn into 2d10 plus 4 physical damage. And then I highlight this to help make it easier for me to remember. I think that is all I need to do in terms of scaling this environment. I italicize the prompts to make it easier for them to stand out for me, and the description. The potential adversaries, when I'm using environments like this, I don't necessarily hold myself just to that list of adversaries. I have not thrown an acid burrower at this party, I don't think. And so that is certainly an option. I would need to tier that adversary up as well. The other thing I want to look at is what are some of the cool tier 2 adversaries that I haven't used for this group. because they're going to level up to 3 either at the end of this session, probably at the end of this session, honestly. No, wait. I told them to level up last time. Yes. Level 3 is still tier 2, but they're scaling up within tier 2, right? They're getting a little bit more powerful relative to the tier. So I haven't used a battle box. I have not used a lot of cultists. I haven't done the giant mercenary group. So there's a lot of tier 2 adversaries I have not used. A fun one that can make for a not too long scene is my juvenile flicker fly. So I want to grab their stat block as well. And one of the things that I think is great about the flicker fly as like a kind of iconic Daggerheart adversary is that they interact very directly with hope and fear. Just going to clean up the stat block here a little bit. Difficulty 14, so they're not the nastiest adversary in terms of difficulty within this tier, but they have some cool things they do, right? As a solo, they have 10 hit points, so even my very high damage brawler would have to hit this flicker fly 4 times to take them out, right? 3 HP per time, and then 1 more hit on the 4th time. The thing that does is it lets me keep this adversary around to use more of their features, and hopefully in that creating an interesting, memorable scene. Just reformatting here. Okay, so my juvenile flicker fly, I will probably keep this as a solo when I use it. What I might do, but haven't yet, is create an environment to go with them to be able to support the type of scene that I want from a random encounter with a flicker fly. So the things that the flicker fly does that are special are this pair of mind dance and hallucinatory breath. And this is just straight out of the SRD, right? Mark is stressed to create a magically dazzling display that grapples the minds of nearby foes. All targets within close range must make an instinct reaction roll. For each target that failed, you gain a fear, and the flicker fly learns one of the target's fears, the character's fears. And then they have hallucinatory breath, right? So if they're a little bit an analog to a dragon, they don't breathe fire. They breathe a hallucinatory gas. And what that gas does is it shows them their fears. And so if the flicker fly has learned the fears of the PCs through Mind Dance, they get disadvantage on the roll when the flicker fly is making them hallucinate their own fears, because that hallucination is more effective. And this feature runs on a 1d6 loop, which means I roll that 1d6 the first time the flicker fly takes damage and activate that countdown. It ticks down once every time the player characters make an action roll. And when it triggers, I use the ability and then I roll a d6 again. And that's how many more action rolls it takes before the flicker fly uses their hallucinatory breath again. This adversary also has Relentless 3, which means I can spotlight them 3 times as part of a GM turn. This adversary has a way to generate fear, so they can be really nasty, right? I use Mind Dance. They make instinct reaction rolls. It generates fear. I use that fear to have the flicker fly attack more. Now, I have to mark a stress every time I do Mind Dance, so I can't just spam Mind Dance endlessly and max myself up on fear to then be relentless every time. There's kind of a limit on what I can do just mechanically, beyond the fact that narratively I'm not likely to just go, okay, my first move is Mind Dance, and then I'm going to spend that fear, attack, attack, Mind Dance, attack, attack. I want to have some more variation. I want the Flicker Fly to move around. I'm going to try to think about what the objective in the scene is, right? Is the Flicker Fly hunting the player characters? Are the characters trying to drive the Flicker Fly out of some space, right? Is the Flicker Fly attacking people in a community? And what the player characters mostly want is for the Flicker Fly to leave or to create the circumstances where the Flicker Fly will not want to come back. So I think I'm going to make a new environment, Withered Beast Attack. And what that is going to do is I'm going to put it in the middle of these other environments. No, I'm going to move Perilous Journey. And now I'm going to build a new one. So this is going to be, I'm going to build this environment to be flexible, but I'm going to build it the first time to be about a Witherwild corrupted Flickerfly attacking people in the wilderness or people in transit or something. And so this is going to be an event type environment. It's about the attack more than the place itself. That's the thing that's happening. And so a Witherwild, nope, I gotta scroll down more. Corrupted beast attacks a group of civilians driven to unnatural aggression, right? The Witherwild part is key here. And so the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up and I'm going to turn this into a withered juvenile Flickerfly, where they have the withered tag, so that if I hit a player character and they take severe damage, they're going to gain a wither token as per the rules in the Witherwild campaign frame. And the other thing I might do is figure out how to like corrupt or add a Witherwild dimension to some of their other features to help kind of solidify the fiction of this is not just a normal Flickerfly, this is a withered juvenile Flickerfly, right? And so we're going to say uneven crystalline wings and Mind Dance. How could I would want to rename Mind Dance into something nastier, right? Like mental torment or fear delving, or I come down here to hallucinatory breath and I figure out how to make this worse, right? Targets who fail mark a stress and lose a hope is already pretty rough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a passive, warped fears. And the idea here is that a withered Flickerfly, when they manifest fears, is going to create stuff that's worse. Right? When withered juvenile Flickerfly, or when the hallucinatory breath countdown triggers, their hallucinatory gas persists until the next roll with hope. PCs that take or make an action roll within the gas replace their hope die with a D8. So the other thing that I need to do here is I need to codify how big the gas range, right? All targets in front of them up to a far range. So it's a big area that's kind of going to be everything. So I'm going to wonder if I bring this back down to close so that I don't have to use a battlefield that's quite so expansive, right? Because close range is 30 feet in every direction around the flicker fly. So I'm making this feature less powerful in some ways, but I'm giving it a synergy in terms of the warped fears. The other thing I could do with this, and this is sort of turning into an adversary design, but that's part of prep for me, and then I'll jump back to some other things, is if I want to emphasize the wither part, do I come down and look at hallucinatory breath and turn it into like withering breath, right? Targets whose fears are known gain disadvantage, and then targets who fail mark a stress and gain a wither token. Losing a hope is nasty. Wither tokens give the GM fear if they haven't generated wither, generated wither scars. So what I might say is, right, so I can make it be automatic, or I could say targets who fail must mark a stress and lose a hope or gain a wither token. Right, that's a slightly less nasty version where I'm still doing the same thing, but there is a pinch if they are out of hope. If they can't lose a hope or choose not to lose a hope, they're going to gain a wither token, which eventually will probably become fear for me, or it might give them a wither scar where it's transforming them in their physical forms. Right, so I'm tweaking some things here, right? I'm going to be describing hallucinations that are probably going to be more trippy because they're influenced by the Witherwild, but I still want to emphasize the character's fears because that's a core element to the Flickerfly, and I think it's really cool. So I'm going to leave the Flickerfly with those couple of tweaks. When I make an environment for myself, I will often skip the potential adversaries thing because I just already know what I'm using them for. What I do want to write is impulses. Display needless aggression, right? This is the beast. Pull on PC's heartstrings, endanger civilians, show how the Witherwild corrupts the natural order. Right? Impulses are things that the environment manifests, pushes you toward, pushes other beings toward, incentivizes, pulls you toward. With impulses, I'm thinking of the way that threats and fronts are written in like Apocalypse World. And again, as with all my streams, my perspectives on these things are my personal perspectives. If they resonate with you, I invite you to try them on and see how they work for you. But I am not trying to be dogmatic here. I don't want to speak for anybody else. Just the way that I approach these things for myself. So, right, basic thing. A withered animal is attacking a group of 6 civilians and their caravan. Right, so I know that there's a caravan, there's a few civilians, and then there's this creature. They are being overpowered and will... they're being overpowered. How do I want to phrase this? So I'm going to have there be a reaction feature for our countdown. When the flickerfly attacks a civilian, the civilian is just gone if the adversary hits. These are not people that have meaningful damage thresholds, because I don't want to have to roll damage here if I can avoid it. If a player character has something like I am your shield and they take the hit, that's fine. I'm just going to use the damage dice pool of the adversary. And if they have something that mitigates some damage, I may just let them save the civilian entirely to make it be simple. A thing I'm going to be conscious of is if I have this countdown and I have the hallucinatory breath countdown, that is more things to keep track of. The other thing I would do is turn this into a passive that just says civilians have an evasion of 10, and if they are hit, they are incapacitated. So I don't have to necessarily keep track of the countdown, right? And maybe that's easier. James Hendry Photos, thank you for following the channel. Hope you enjoy what I have to talk about today. So right, this is going to be pretty rough. So I'm turning this into a passive. When the flickerfly makes an attack against a civilian, evasion 10, hit points 1, and they hit, the civilian is defeated and dead or dying. Yeah, I'm glad you're here to catch stuff live. Let me know if you have any questions. I am kind of walking through real prep for one of my weekly games. Okay, because these are two passives, the number one thing I want to add is an action for the environment to take, right? If I have an action or a reaction, that's going to give me some more tools for making it so that when I'm playing this scene out, I have things already written where I've planned out options for here's a beat or a move that I can take that is about the scene and the world more than just what the adversary is doing, right? And so on so break and panic is a reaction by the civilians, right? The Withered Beast attack is an event environment that covers the whole situation. And so rather than writing out a stat block for these thank you, iSneaks. I thought that I was already showing it. So I've scrolled down so you should be able to see what is happening now. So this is break and panic on a failure with fear by a PC. So right when the scene moves toward fear on a failure, right, when those intersect, when it's the worst result, one of the civilians breaks and tries to run out into the woods, right? They move a close distance away from the beast and will be lost to the wilderness if not called or brought back before the next. So the thing here that I have to figure out is, do I want this to be another countdown where I moved one other thing away from a countdown. So maybe I've freed up the mental load or cognitive load to have a countdown for this eventuality. Because if I say you have to bring them back or call them back before the next roll with fear, that could be the very next roll. And I don't know that I want to be quite that mean. Brought back before the next rest, right? This could become a loose end, right? Somebody goes running off into the wilderness and then they get lost and then the PCs are going to try to find them. This gives me a new plot hook that flows directly from what has been happening. What I don't have here is a fear action, right? This reaction, break, and panic, I could absolutely say that this costs a fear. And I think it probably should. I will have a fear because it only happens on a failure with fear. But that fear then can't be spent on other things. So, not too bad. The last thing I want for this environment, at least for now, is what is the action that I can have be my GM move when the play moves to me? Right? So that could be the civilians trying to attack the flicker fly. Are they trying to direct the cart away from the adversary, where this becomes kind of like a rolling battle, right? And what I like about this is that this is a great failure with hope action, where I want to make a soft move that pushes the story forward or maybe presents a new threat, but I don't want to go as hard as if I had a failure with fear or even a, success with fear. So the civilian driving the cart pushes the to charge forward, moving a close distance down the path. The other thing to do here is to introduce some kind of hazard, right? Where they move toward the path, but then there's a hazard that's going to cause a problem. Because I've made all of the other countdowns go away, now I feel okay to use a countdown. If there is, set a consequence countdown, 3. When it triggers, the cart crashes or goes dangerously off course, damaging the cart and injuring the civilians on board. All PCs on board must make a agility reaction roll or take, right? Let's get out of here starts a ticking clock that is, the cart is just going and they're not really in control and they're going to run into something or crash into something or go off-road and get the cart destroyed, tangled up in vines and thorns and stuff like that. And if the PCs are on the cart with them, they're also going to get crashed, right? There can only be one countdown from this feature active at a time, right? There's only one cart, so there can only be one countdown of whether they're going to crash. Because I might use let's get out of here again to have them keep moving in order to change things around in the scene or the situation. A consequence countdown of 3 is not too hard to trigger. So this is a way for me to, with an action that is itself not super hard, I am creating a problem that's going to become a bigger problem down the line, which is the kind of move that I really like having at at the, within my grasp during a scene like this, because it can be easy to fall into the rhythm of they attack, you attack, they attack, you attack, they attack, you attack, until somebody is out, right? The monster is defeated, they get driven away. This gives me an additional danger. The scene is no longer, can you fight off the flicker fly and save the people, right? Where there's a really linked, it becomes, does the cart crash? Are the people hurt? What happens to the flicker fly, right? Because this flicker fly is also corrupted by the Witherwild, and how to figuring out what is up with the Witherwild is one of the major themes of this campaign frame, and it has been a theme that is important within this campaign. This group is a bit more focused on curing the serpent sickness, but they definitely still care about the Witherwild. And what this then does is it gives me a scene, kind of a capsule scene, that I can deploy at any point, which still emphasizes or raises some of the themes of the campaign to keep them present and to move things forward. I'm creating situations that I can present to the player characters so that we all together can see how these characters react to another situation where the Witherwild has made things more dangerous for people out in Fanewick. So what I have now is the Flickerfly and Beast Attack paired as an adversary and event environment. So I feel good about that. I have my Perilous Journey traversal environment, which is just moving through a dangerous part of the world where I have a countdown based on how long it's going to take you to go. I have a feature that's about there being bad weather. I have a thing that is, oh, well, make there be adversaries. I have other options for adversaries, but it's still here. And then I have, oh, well, what happens if you fail? Why did this happen? Oh, well, maybe you hurt yourself, or you ran into something that caused you to be hurt. I could stick something into this environment that basically does a phase change from you are on your journey to there is a beast attack. If I were doing this in a adventure, I might write that transition. I don't feel like I need to write that for myself because it's already on my mind. But it's absolutely the kind of thing that you could do, right? You have a traversal environment which could then generate a new scene, right? Within the overall journey, something happens to introduce a new obstacle or threat, which then becomes its own scene, right? We are doing the travel in a montage or a set of scenes, a sequence of scenes. And one of the scenes that happens within that is this encounter with the Flickerfly attacking the people in their caravan. Environments are a menu, is a thing that I've said a few times before, and I will keep on saying because I think it's a useful framing. There are selections of options for moves to take, right? Bad weather is a button that I can press during a journey to make things scarier or more draining, right? Bad weather, all PCs mark a stress or lose a hope. And if you press on, your next roll to traverse is made with disadvantage because of the bad weather. And if you try to wait it out, the GM is going to get more fear because the world is going to keep moving on. I also have my encounter group in the Umbral Hounds with the Umbral Huntmaster. What I don't have for this is the environment that goes with it, or a sense of where I would deploy this group of adversaries. When I used them in my game yesterday, I had a scene that was in a place that was already established, and then there were a few rolls that led me to thinking, okay, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull the trigger on there being a dangerous encounter in this space before the group gets to bed down and take a rest. And then I went and grabbed the Umbral Hound and the others because I already had them in different documents, and I've been meaning to find an opportunity to play test them. Right? Because I'm making environments, I'm making new adversaries, I'm writing adventures, and a lot of this stuff can all flow into and out of one another. But that doesn't just work if you are a community creator, right? If you're publishing stuff to use with Daggerheart. If you are GMing several games, you can grab something from one game and you pull it over here. Or you grab something from a supplement that you picked up and go, that's exactly the right thing for this scene. Or you go, I need like a tier 2 solo that makes sense in a desert situation. You know, I go paging through my books, trying to find something that I can use or that I can reflavor and have it function. So that's some stuff in the world, right? What I haven't done is talked about Greymire itself. And if they're going back to Greymire, I want to have at least done a little bit of thinking about what has happened since they've been gone. So I'm going to scoot this all down. It's probably not going to still be burning when they get back. They set some fires when they left, and it's been close to 2 days. So maybe this is Greymire in crisis. When the group left, there was a emergent militant rebellion against the Havenite occupiers by the people of this town. One of the officers of the group had been told to basically do a bunch of stuff and screw things up, including burning the Ladies' Vale fields. And so things are going to be real screwy. Based on where things were at the end of the session where the group left, what I think makes sense here is that Greymire has routed the Havenite group, Havenite outpost. There's a term I'm looking for that is evading me. But more are coming. Set a long-term countdown. 3 when it triggers. Am I drawing on current events in pursuit of some kind of catharsis? Absolutely. Because it's a scary time right now. And it would be really silly of me, I think, when playing in the Witherwild campaign frame, to not acknowledge and examine the parallels between Haven's expansionist, colonialist agenda and the ways in which that reflects on and parallels things that are happening in everyday life right now. Our group is partially folks in the UK and partially folks in the US. Emergent fascism is a problem in both of those countries in different ways. And I am whom I am. This group knows that they know my politics. And me introducing something like that and drawing on some of those parallels is, I don't think that's going to go awry. I think that's going to connect with people pretty well. So we'll have the town where they've pushed out the soldiers for now, but more are coming. Right? They are no longer being harassed by the swarms, but are low on food and medical supplies, and the town has suffered a lot of structural damage from fires and fighting. The outer wall is breached in 2 places, right? They're coming back to a town where they made some big moves to do what they needed or what they felt like they needed to do. And the way that they did it, to me, felt like it was going to create some nasty repercussions. So this is a little bit them coming home, like their consequences coming home to roost. But in this case, they started some fires, left, and now they're coming back. And what I want to do is show the upside and the downside of what they've done, right? This town is no longer occupied by the Haven military. It's going to be attacked by the Haven military soon. But these people have regained self-control or like independence for now. And what I'm doing by setting this up is I'm going to ask the dramatic question implicitly, are they going to stay and fight to help these people? Are they going to do something to try to make it so that the people of Greymire can fight for themselves? Or are they going to do something else? Are they going to ride out and try to meet the Haven brigade before they can get to Greymire? I don't know. And I don't need an answer for that. That is for the players to decide, not me. A thing that I want to do here is I'm going to add myself a paint the scene prompt. How else can we tell that the people of Greymire are tired but exhilarated by having driven off the Havenite occupiers? Right, this is about, I'm going to fix my spelling here. I can type very quickly, but not perfectly. I'm going to give some description, and then I'm going to say, and now let's paint the scene. How else can we tell that the people of Greymire are tired but exhilarated by having driven off the Havenite occupiers? We're going to linger in that moment of proud exhaustion. And with this prompt, I want to try and bring the players in to connect with that emotional state of the people of Greymire. To make it more meaningful when they decide whether they're going to stay and fight, help do repairs, or whatever else it is that they've done, right? Greymire is the town that they have been in for this whole story arc. And I'm not ready to leave it behind based on where things are right now in terms of the story. I'm writing out this Greymire stuff. If they do not go back to Greymire, Greymire will get probably razed, right? Much of the town will be destroyed, and Haven might just destroy the town and then build something where it was and start over completely in control instead of having occupied a town, right? That's the bad ending. The people throw off their oppressors, and then the oppressors are like, nuh-uh, and squash dissent. But if the player characters are there, they can do something about it. Hello, Not So Simpleton. Love the bullet reminders at top of session. Wondering how often you do a full recap of the previous session. I usually do not an exhaustive recap, but I tend to walk through what I saw as the big moments. And then I ask the players, are there other moments or things from last session that you want to remind us or make sure we talk about before we proceed? In one of my other games, I have a player who takes a lot of notes, and this week I just asked that player, hey, do you want to get us rolling with a recap? Because I know you take a lot of notes. In this group, we have a player who takes a lot of notes, and that player shares those notes in the Discord that we use to organize our play. So recaps are pretty well covered there. I do make a practice of let's talk ourselves through a recap, even if we have one written up, just to be able to refresh things and make it easier to get back into the fiction so that we don't have to spend as much time muddling our way through that process in character. Let's talk as a table where we were and then dive in. And thank you for redeeming the channel points. I'm going to take a drink here. Yeah, the recap, we were talking about the fiction. We're not necessarily only talking within the realm of the fiction, right? I'll talk about stuff that is known at the player level, and I'll usually talk at that level, not necessarily only just within the fiction, though I'm focused on the fiction. So I have a paint the scene prompt here. The other thing I want to think about is how do these specific characters interact with the things that I'm introducing in terms of challenges and problems. So, who in the group did you know growing up? Right? If a group does show up, Malleus is our character who is from Haven. Let's see. What town did you hear of that was... Or, let's be more open. What happened to the last town you heard of that ousted their Havenite occupiers? Alva is a seraph from Fainwick. Nemesius, what is Meyer's biggest tactical weakness at the moment? Nemesius is kind of a Greek demigod-ish character. His background is very much, we're taking mythic Greece and putting it into the setting, but it's far away, and this character is from a place that's far away. So writing hooks for him can be tricky sometimes. The approach I'm taking here is that as a well-studied and well-traveled warrior, he would be able to identify like strategic and tactical weaknesses. I'm looking for another term, but it's not coming to me. I've not been sleeping the best this last week. Even though great things are happening. I'm having a good time on the Drakenheim project. Sleep is just somewhat eluding me. And Rudy, right, Rudy is our halfling. He is halfling and ribbit by ancestry, and is just a precious little boy. He's just a little guy. So when I can, I try to write prompt questions that are questions I have about the world, or questions that I think would apply or come up for a character. Here I am definitely inspired by what I've seen of GM prep for Powered by the Apocalypse games. Specifically, I'm going to mention somebody who I don't follow or support anymore, but I'm going to go ahead and give them credit here. So, content note for a shit heel who is not in the RPG space anymore. Adam Coble was a well-known streamer, game designer, actual play creator. I learned a lot about a way of approaching GM prep in a kind of Power by the Apocalypse paradigm through watching his prep streams and the games that he has run. I do not follow or recommend his stuff anymore. But the way of engaging with Power by the Apocalypse prompts here that I'm talking about is under this idea that we're leaving questions unanswered, or we're leaving open space in the story where if I have questions about the world or about what's going to happen that express my curiosity, I'm going to write them down and use those when I think they come to mind, right? Either asking them directly or asking the question to myself and then making moves based on what I think makes sense in the moment. Well, I'm curious what happens when the Havenites come back. I might make a move that is like cutting away to seeing the whole regiment that's coming and what else are they bringing that they didn't have when they were trying to maintain control of Greymire. Or I might zoom in and spotlight the commander of this expeditionary force. And then when I return to the scene with the player characters, I might either find a way to get them that information, or still staying on the player level, ask a player, oh, well, how is it that your character knows this person, right? So I can create some dramatic irony or some foreshadowing to connect the telegraphing of future danger with where things are in the moment, what is happening in the scene. Some GMs are much less inclined to use that level of out of character knowledge or metagaming or dramatic irony, however you want to talk about it. I take a lot of joy, and I find that I can help foster a lot of engagement and satisfaction in a shared storytelling approach where the other players do have that broader knowledge of and a broader perspective on what is happening in the story overall. So I have my key elements here in Greymire. I've thought about what is coming. I have a mechanical measure that I can keep track of how this might apply. This long-term countdown, I will absolutely leave myself space to spend fear and tick that countdown instead of only waiting for a long rest. I want this threat to be evident, and I want to hang it over the group. So I'm going to put this countdown on our shared world map where the kind of big countdown / clocks are to telegraph that threat. But I'm only going to do it once I've established in the fiction what is happening, right? I'm going to establish some stuff and then say, I am setting a long-term countdown at 3. And when this triggers, the next wave of Havenite soldiers will arrive. Right? That's how I'm going to do that introduction, I believe. That's my intention. So I have a sense of what's going on in the town. Hello, Vita Bjornen. So the 3 is how many ticks the countdown has. So a long-term countdown 3, I start at 3, and if it advances 3 times, 3 to 2, 2 to 1, 1 to 0, when it hits 0, then it triggers and more Haven soldiers will show up. This is how I express countdowns. I believe it is how those countdowns are expressed in the core book. Sometimes a countdown will be a long-term countdown and then have a number. If it's long-term, it probably doesn't have a loop, but there are other bits about countdowns. I am going to find the section in the core rulebook that talks about countdowns because there's more information. So page 162 has the big overall rules on countdowns. That 162, 163 also has advanced countdown features, including a randomized starting value, which we had with our Flickerfly, loops, and then increasing or decreasing loops. I covered all of those in my video on countdowns, which was just within the last few weeks. So you can go and refer to that in addition if you want more of my thoughts on using countdowns in Daggerheart. I might end up doing some more prep for this game, but talking through my prep means it goes much more slowly, because otherwise, like normally, all of this process just happens in my head, and when I don't have to explain it, it can go much faster. Slowing down has meant that I've spent some more time on things them I might have just gone more quickly through, and that's cool. But mostly what I wanted to do was take a nice chunk of time and pull back the curtain and try to show off as much and explain how I approach my prep in Daggerheart, how I decide what adversaries to bring in, how I approach tweaking or creating adversaries, how I build or adjust environments to support the scenes that I think are possible, or to give myself tools to deploy depending on what happens in the story, how I game out a situation that I expect the player characters to engage with, right? This is not, here are the 3 scenes that are going to happen. It is, what is happening in Greymire? What are the current threats and dangers? What is just over the horizon coming at the group, right? This Soldier's Imminent, in some ways, is very much parallel to, a front in the Apocalypse World style, right? Something happened in the story, and now there's a new wave of danger coming toward Greymire, which is where the PCs are either going to be, or one of the places that they have cared about because it's been a key location within the story. What happens based on the player character's actions or inaction will not be the end of what happens for Greymire. I'm just planning out what I think are some potential things in the near future. If they fight off this wave and then leave Greymire, there's probably going to be another one down the road, because Greymire is pretty close to the traditional Haven-Fanewick border. And so it is going to be emblematic of the conflict between Haven as this expansionist imperialist power, colonial mostly, right? Because they're taking land and making the people in that space grow Lady's Veil to make more cure, is like the really key thing. Other places in Fanewick are farther away from Haven, and so I'm going to be using them to investigate or to exemplify other themes or other parts of what this overall campaign story might be like. I have not drawn on an element from a character's background, Rudy, the Ribbit halfling, where he was in love with the Prince of Haven and thought that they loved each other, and then learned that he was just viewed as a plaything. So I need to draw on that, but the royal politics of Haven have been pretty distant from where the player characters are. One of the future story arcs I want to do is to either bring that prince out or have something involving the royal family reach where the player characters are, create a hook for that character to bring the group back toward what is going on with the prince. Or as the storyline evolves, I'll find a place to be able to put forward a hook or create situations where that element of character backstory can take the forefront, and we can investigate that and push it forward a bit more. So the other countdowns that I have going in this campaign are from the first story arc. The player characters found the last egg of Shunaush, the Ophids, the granite Ophid who was killed by Haven 200 years ago, and that murder is the thing that caused the serpent sickness to happen. A new granite Ophid has been born, but it is only just past an infant kind of divine spirit. The last they saw of Shania, she was going to travel throughout Fanewick and speak to or introduce herself to other faint divinities. If Haven finds out that there is a new granite Ophid, they are going to do everything they can to kill her, because they're going to believe that she wants revenge, which she may or may not end up wanting. So I have a countdown with 4 ticks left. This is a long-term countdown. Haven discovers Shania. I also have a tracker for my week of night, and I'm going to have that long-term countdown for the Haven, the new wave of Haven attacks. This is about time, right? End of Arc 2, starting Arc 3, when I'm going to introduce some new other hooks and then let the players decide where to go. For the first 2 arcs, for the very first arc, I gave, here is the thing you've been asked to do, and the players followed through. I then gave a few hooks, but out of character. I said, hey, this is the one that I have a written adventure for, so it'd be great if you're interested in that. Now I want things to open up a bit more. This session, this prep session, a lot of what I did was make stuff that could go in several different places, but then I wanted to make sure to hit the Greymire material, because there's a good chance that they're going to go back to this town, and even if they didn't, I wanted to take a few more steps in my thought process to figure out what's ahead for the town, or what could be ahead for the town if the player characters don't interfere. So that is some actual prep for one of my Daggerheart games in the Witherwild campaign frame. I hope that this has been useful for everybody who is here watching live, and I hope it's useful for folks who watch on VOD, on YouTube, and on Twitch. As a reminder, you can support my work doing these streams and creating other Daggerheart compatible material that I put out on my Patreon at patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood, which is in the chat there. I am still working on the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Daggerheart project that was announced last week. The crowdfunding campaign for that is going to be in November. What additional things I do to support that in November are mostly TBD, but you can expect that I will be talking about it, and I may have some other activities that I'll either talk about on these streams, will happen on these streams, or other things. All TBD, right? This is the first project I'm working on with Ghostfire. The process has been great so far. What they ask me to do promotionally is not all determined just yet. But if you are curious about that project and have not already gone and done so, I would invite you, and in fact ask, if you could go to kickstarter.com/projects/dungeons-of-Drakkenheim-Daggerheart. The link is in the chat there. I will also link it in the YouTube description to make it easy. If you want to go there, take a look at the preview page and click on the tab Notify Me on Launch. You will get an email that tells you, hey, this campaign is live now. And in doing so, you will show that there is interest in and excitement for high quality, long form, supplemental material for use with the Daggerheart rules. And you are also supporting one of my projects, right? You're supporting me directly. So I am grateful for any form of that support you care to give. And I will be back next week with another stream. And then there will be some other stuff on my Patreon in the next week or two. Tomorrow and Friday, I am taking some time to myself to go and do a short trip with my spouse. So I may not be as active on the YouTube comments or in my Patreon for just a day or two. But there are still more things. I was working on creator-owned Daggerheart stuff this morning, so many more things ahead, more streams. If there are topics you want to hear me speak on with regards to Daggerheart specifically, game design, or RPGs more generally, drop a comment in the YouTube or go to pose those questions on the Patreon, things like that. So thank you to Loose and Smokin', iSneaks, Vita Bjornen, Not So Simpleton, James Hendry Photos, Dead Hand Illustrations, everybody else who watched live, and all the lovely folks watching on VOD. And I will see you next time. Get ready for my end card. Okay, bye.